Hey, Grandma, try not to scratch the paint while you dust that thing, one young sniper jeered. The armory of the elite sniper unit smelled of gun oil and cold steel. Master Sergeant Lena Vargis stood apart, silver hair in a bun, calm posture, while Sergeant Mason Holt's smirk echoed the room's disdain. Above, Colonel Raymond Drake watched from a shadowed balcony, eyes narrowing. Hours later, the chaos hit. The unit's prize sniper rifle lay dead on the bench, every expert beaten. Without a word, Lena stepped forward. Her hands moved like she'd built it herself. 30 seconds later, it lived again. The colonel didn't look at the rifle. He saluted her. And when her name was read aloud, every soldier in that room realized they'd been standing in the presence of a legend. The armory of the 3rd Special Marksman Unit was never quiet. Even in downtime, the space hummed with the kind of energy only a fiercely competitive team could produce. Rows of precision rifles lined the racks like sacred relics, each one cared for with obsessive pride. Soldiers milled around in olive fatigues, swapping exaggerated stories about impossible shots, championship wins, and the legendary feats they claimed as their own. It was the unspoken rule here: skill was currency, and swagger was how you spent it. You didn't just prove yourself on the range, you proved it in how loudly you could talk about it afterward. This morning, Sergeant First Class Mason Holt was holding court near the central workbench. Tall, lean, and always just on the edge of smirking, Holt had the posture of a man who knew everyone was watching him, and liked it that way. He was one of the unit's top shooters and had the medals to back it up. But it was his knack for cutting humor that really kept him at the center of attention. When the door to the armory opened, conversations faltered. An older woman stepped in, calm, composed, carrying nothing but a small duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Master Sergeant Lena Vargis. To most here, she was just the new admin the colonel had brought in for some kind of logistics assignment. She wore no visible insignia beyond the standard issue uniform. Her silver hair was drawn back into a strict bun, her expression unreadable. She paused at the threshold, taking in the space with quiet eyes. The younger soldiers sized her up in seconds and, deciding she wasn't a threat to their pecking order, turned back to their conversations. Holt, however, saw an opportunity. "Hey, Grandma," he called out, just loud enough for the room to hear. "Try not to scratch the paint while you dust that thing." Laughter erupted, bouncing off the concrete walls. He pointed to a rack of 6 well-used Benelli M4 shotguns, the kind typically handed to recruits for basic familiarization. "Here, these could use a clean. Should be easy enough." It wasn't a request. It was a dismissal dressed up as an order. Lena didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes or snap back. She simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, stepped toward the rack, and began setting her duffel down beside the workbench. From the balcony above, Colonel Raymond Drake leaned on the railing, his arms folded. He had been around long enough to know arrogance when he saw it, and to spot the subtle tells of someone who had no need to prove themselves. His eyes narrowed as he watched Lena's movements. To the untrained observer, she looked like any other older NCO nearing retirement, but Drake's gaze lingered on the way she carried her weight evenly across both feet. The balanced posture of someone used to holding still for long stretches without fatigue. Her steps were measured, her center of gravity never shifting unnecessarily. "I've seen that before," he thought, "and not in an admin office." The soldiers around Holt continued their banter, a chorus of inside jokes and inflated tales. This was the culture here: confidence worn like armor, respect earned through public performance, and judgment delivered in seconds based on what you look like. And that's the thing about military units. For all their discipline and formality, they're still made up of people. People who, more often than they'd admit, decide who's worth listening to based on appearance, age, and the first 10 seconds of interaction. If you don't fit their mold, you're written off before you've even started. Lena wasn't in their mold. She opened her duffel and unrolled a faded canvas toolkit. Not the standard issue cleaning set every armorer here used, but a collection of specialized gunsmith tools, each nested in its own worn leather slot. The steel was dark with age but gleamed faintly, oiled and cared for like old friends. A few of the younger men exchanged glances. It wasn't enough to stop the laughter, but it planted a seed. Holt watched her work with a smirk that said, "Cute. She brought her own toys." From above, Colonel Drake didn't move. He just kept watching, filing away every detail. If you've been in long enough, you learn that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most dangerous. True competence doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to win the room's approval before it gets to work. It just gets to work and lets the results speak for themselves. That was exactly what Lena Vargis was doing now. No rush, no wasted movement, no reaction to the jabs thrown her way. Just quiet focus. Holt's voice carried again, dripping with mock instruction. You know we like 'em spotless here. Nice and shiny. Think you can handle that, Master Sergeant? Still no answer. Colonel Drake let the silence stretch. He'd seen this play out before. The underestimated professional, the swaggering challenger, the slow burn toward a reckoning no one else saw coming. Down on the floor, Lena continued her work, her hands steady, her eyes never leaving the task. If she heard Holt, she gave no sign. If she felt the stares of half the unit on her back, she ignored them. The colonel's jaw tightened. Something told him that when this woman finally decided to speak, or act, the entire culture of this armory was going to shift. And Mason Holt, for all his bravado, wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late. The banter in the armory softened to background noise as Lena Vargis quietly claimed the far corner workbench. No one offered her a chair. No one asked if she needed help. She didn't look like she needed either. Her weathered duffel was not standard issue. No stenciled name. No regulation straps. Its fabric had been mended in neat stitches, the kind done by hand, not a factory machine. She set it down gently, unzipped it, and drew out a rolled strip of oiled canvas bound by a single leather tie. She untied it without hurry. The roll unfurled to reveal tools unlike anything in the unit's supply cages. Brass-handled screwdrivers whose grips bore the shine of decades of use. Steel punches in graduated sizes, their finish deep and clean. Precision tweezers, their tips needle-sharp. Each piece rested in its own leather pocket, fitted perfectly, cared for meticulously. At the center, folded with exact corners, was an oilcloth so spotless it seemed ceremonial. Lena placed the cloth on the bench, smoothing it with her palm. Then she reached for the first shotgun on the rack. A Benelli M4, well used but still serviceable. Her fingers found the receiver latch without looking. A quiet click, and the weapon began to come apart. She didn't strip it with speed to impress onlookers. She worked with the kind of economy that comes from thousands of repetitions. Each part was set on the cloth in a precise order, edges aligned, no clatter of steel on steel. This was the difference between someone who knows the steps and someone who owns the craft. Most armorers move like they're checking boxes. Disassemble, clean, reassemble. The goal is to make it function. That's good enough. But for people like Lena, good enough is just the starting line. She inspected each piece under the warm bench light, turning it slowly to catch the faintest scratches or residue. Her fingertips brushed along the metal, feeling for imperfections invisible to the eye. At one point, she paused with the barrel cradled in her left hand. Her right thumb traced the interior and stopped at a mark no one else would have noticed. No reaction, no complaint. Just a quiet reach for a thin cleaning rod, a new patch, and the patient work of restoring it. Across the room, Mason Holt leaned against a rack, arms folded, the smirk still in place but not as bright. His eyes kept drifting back to her hands. Lena's movements had a rhythm, steady, unbroken, almost like a craftsman's metronome. The springs and pins didn't resist her. They yielded, as if they had been waiting for her touch. The second shotgun followed the first, then the third. Soldiers nearby began to notice the absence of the usual sounds. No impatient clanging of tools, no muttered frustration. Just the faint swish of cloth through barrels, the quiet clicks of parts sliding home. Mastery doesn't always announce itself with flourish. Sometimes it moves so efficiently, so free of wasted motion, that it appears casual. That illusion hides the truth. Thousands of hours, relentless discipline, and an unwillingness to cut corners even when no one is watching. By the fourth shotgun, one of the younger marksmen drifted closer, pretending to grab something from a nearby shelf. He lingered, watching the angle of her hands, the way she guided a spring into place without the sharp snap they were used to hearing. She didn't look up, but her hands shifted just slightly, letting him see better. By the fifth, conversation in the room had quieted. Holt still leaned where he was, but his expression had shifted. Not quite respect, not yet, but no longer open dismissal. The sixth and final shotgun came apart as easily as the first. Lena tuned it as she had the others, checking tolerances, polishing contact points. Every screw was tightened not just to specification, but to the tension that made the action cycle smooth as water. When she was done, 6 shotguns rested on the bench. They didn't gleam with over-polish. That would have been vanity. Instead, they looked ready, perfectly clean, balanced, and eager to work. She rolled her tools back into their neat bundle, leather folding around steel in practice motions. The bundle went into her bag. She wiped her hands, picked up her canteen, and took a slow drink. She didn't announce she was finished. She didn't look for approval. In the silence that followed, Holt shifted his weight, just enough to betray the change in the room. Even without words, every soldier nearby felt it. Something about the air was different. From the balcony above, Colonel Drake had not moved for the entire process. He watched the quiet transformation, not of the weapons, but of the men watching her. He knew what was coming next. Lena set her canteen down and folded her arms loosely, her posture unchanged from when she'd first entered. The laughter and smugness from earlier were gone. In their place was the stillness before a shift, the kind that upends assumptions in an instant. No one knew it yet, but the morning in the armory was far from over. The moment came without warning. The sound that broke the armory's calm wasn't loud. Just a sharp curse hissed between clenched teeth. Specialist Danner, one of the unit's youngest but most promising armorers, stepped back from the main workbench, his face pale. On the bench lay the unit's crown jewel, a heavily customized M210 sniper rifle, purpose-built for the All-Army Championship that was less than 24 hours away. It wasn't just a weapon, it was the pride of the team, the one they believed could take the title back from last year's winners. "It's dead," Danner said, his voice thin. "Trigger won't reset. I've stripped it twice. Spring's fine. Geometry looks right. I don't get it." Mason Holt, hearing the words, pushed himself off the rack and crossed the room in 3 quick strides. He was the rifle's primary shooter for the competition, and every ounce of his swagger evaporated when he saw it lying in pieces. "Move," he ordered. Danner stepped aside, relief and dread mixing on his face. Holt bent over the action, confident at first. But the longer he looked, the deeper his frown cut into his features. "No, this doesn't make sense." He began to strip the rifle down again, his movements fast but less sure with each step. Another armorer joined him, then another. Soon, 3 of the unit's best were working over the weapon, tools flashing, voices tight. The clock on the wall ticked away the morning. Colonel Drake didn't speak from his place above, but his eyes followed every motion. It's in moments like these that the myth of invincibility fades. Teams built on competition and confidence often believe they can solve anything by sheer will. But a rifle doesn't care about ego. Precision machinery obeys only the hands that understand it completely. 15 minutes passed. Parts were swapped, springs checked, pins cleaned, lubricants reapplied. Nothing changed. The trigger remained dead. The rifle might as well have been a display piece. Around the workbench, frustration began to curdle into panic. Lena Vargis hadn't moved from her place in the corner. She'd finished her work on the shotguns, rolled her kit, and simply stood with arms folded, watching the slow collapse of confidence across the room. Her expression didn't shift. No smirk, no pity, just a steady, unreadable calm. Holt set his tools down with more force than necessary. "If we can't fix this, we're done tomorrow." One of the other armorers muttered, "We can pull a backup." Holt's glare cut that down instantly. "This rifle's tuned for my pull, my weight, my breathing. A backup means losing before we even start." The room fell quiet except for the faint sound of someone racking a sidearm in the background. Every soldier present knew what was at stake. And this is where true ability shows itself. Not in drills, not in practice. Not in the easy rhythm of routine. Real skill steps forward in crisis. The kind of skill that doesn't panic, doesn't fill the silence with noise, but waits until the exact moment it's needed. Lena didn't ask for permission. She set her duffel on the bench beside the rifle, unrolled her tools with the same slow precision as before. No one stopped her, though Holt's eyes narrowed slightly, unsure whether to challenge her. She ignored him. Her hands moved over the rifle's action, not in the frantic way the others had, but like she was tracing a familiar map. She pressed the disconnector pin lightly with one finger. No movement. Her brow didn't furrow. Her breathing didn't change. She reached for a jeweler's magnifier from her kit, peered into the shadowed mechanics of the trigger group. "There," she said softly, though the word carried through the armory. "Microfracture on the shear plane of the firing pin. You won't see it without magnification. It's absorbing the hammer's energy before it reaches the primer." It was the first time most of them had heard her speak. Holt stepped closer despite himself, leaning to see through the magnifier. He still couldn't find what she was talking about. Lena set the damaged pin aside and pulled a small oiled packet from her kit. Inside was a replacement, perfectly milled custom work. She seated it with 3 clean motions, reassembled the action, and cycled the bolt once. The trigger clicked with crisp, perfect resistance. 30 seconds. That's all it took. When she stepped back, the rifle was no longer a problem. It was ready. Holt didn't know what to say. Neither did anyone else. The silence in the room wasn't the awkward kind. It was the kind that follows something you can't quite believe you've witnessed. Up on the balcony, Colonel Drake's mouth curved into the faintest ghost of a smile. He had suspected. Now he knew. Lena began rolling her tools again, methodical, unhurried. Around her, the room remained still. She didn't need to look up to feel their eyes on her. And that's the thing about real capability. It doesn't ask for attention. It doesn't need to announce itself with loud declarations. It steps in when the stakes are highest, solves the problem, and steps away. The rifle lay gleaming on the bench. Every man in the room knew what it meant for tomorrow's match. More than that, they knew what it meant about the quiet, silver-haired Master Sergeant they'd underestimated just hours earlier. None of them would ever see her the same way again. The M210 sat on the bench, no longer a lifeless assembly of parts, but whole again, its trigger crisp, its action fluid. The transformation had happened so quickly, so quietly, that the men still seemed frozen, as if waiting for someone to say it out loud. They had all been there, huddled around the rifle, sweating over its stubborn fault, swapping parts and running through every fix they knew. And then Lena Vargis had stepped forward without a word, touched the rifle like it was an old friend, and 30 seconds later, it lived again. No one knew whether to speak or just keep staring. Mason Holt, the man who had been handed that rifle as both a trust and a symbol of the unit's pride, finally broke the silence. "How?" His voice caught, the usual edge gone. He cleared his throat and tried again. "How did you even see that?" Lena didn't meet his eyes. She was rolling her tools back into their leather pouches, her movements calm and deliberate. "You feel it," she said, her tone even. "Metal speaks when you know how to listen." It wasn't bragging. It wasn't meant to impress. It was just the truth, spoken by someone who'd lived it too long to need approval. Up on the balcony, Colonel Raymond Drake moved for the first time since she'd begun. He descended the stairs at an unhurried pace, boots striking the concrete with a measured rhythm. His eyes were on Lena, not the rifle. When he reached the workbench, he didn't touch the weapon, didn't look at Holt, didn't even acknowledge the soldiers still gathered in a loose semicircle. He turned to Holt and said with quiet authority, "Pull up Master Sergeant Vargas's service record." Holt hesitated. "Sir? That's not a suggestion." The sergeant moved stiffly to the terminal, his fingers clumsy on the keyboard. The hum of the machine filled the silence until the screen lit up with Lena's file. Holt leaned closer, reading quickly, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. He began to read aloud, his voice lower than usual. "Name, Vargas Lena. Rank, Master Sergeant. Primary MOS, 18B. Special Forces Weapons Sergeant." The designation alone was enough to earn a few sharp intakes of breath. 18B wasn't just a job. It was a rare and demanding path, one that required a mastery of every small arm, every piece of weaponry a special operations team might carry into the field. But Holt kept reading. Advanced certifications. Master Gunsmith, U.S. Army Marksmanship Unit. Special Skills Identifier. Tier 1 Special Mission Unit, Armorer, Joint Special Operations Command. The words landed like slow, heavy strikes. Tier 1. Joint Special Operations Command. Those were names most soldiers only heard in rumors or in the kind of stories told in hushed voices after midnight. The room was utterly silent now. Colonel Drake let the moment breathe before speaking. Some of you may not understand what that means. Others should have recognized it already. He turned toward the far wall. Mounted high above the racks of rifles was an ornate brass plate framed in dark wood. Dust dulled its surface, but the engraved names still caught the light at certain angles. "Holt," Drake said. "Climb up there. Read the top name on the Bishop Trophy, the one from 20 years ago." Still moving as if in a dream, Holt fetched the short ladder, climbed it, and brushed the dust away with his sleeve. The brass was cold under his hand. Letters emerged, faint but sharp enough to read. He swallowed. L. Vargis. It was like a key turning in a lock. Every man in the room now understood. The woman they'd dismissed this morning as an out-of-place admin clerk was the same Lena Vargis who had once won the highest marksmanship honor in their branch. The name engraved on the trophy they'd all walked past countless times without really seeing. Drake faced the group again. Experience leaves marks. Sometimes it's in the way a person stands, sometimes in how they handle a tool, and sometimes it's in a name on a dusty plate you've stopped noticing. And that was the truth, the kind you don't get from lectures or manuals. Inexperienced eyes look for proof in the loud, the new, the obvious. But real experience is subtle. It's in the balance of weight across your feet. It's in the stillness of your hands under pressure. It's in the confidence to let yourself be underestimated, because you know the day will come when your actions will speak for you. Lena didn't bask in the attention. She didn't correct the record, didn't add to the story. She simply finished packing her kit, zipped the duffel, and set it beside the bench. But for the soldiers in that room, nothing would be the same again. Holt descended from the ladder, his face unreadable. He looked at Lena, then at the rifle, then back at Lena. The smirk that had been his signature was nowhere to be found. Colonel Drake stepped closer to her. "Master Sergeant," he said, his voice carrying the weight of history, "welcome back to the fight." Lena gave him the same small nod she'd given Holt earlier. Economical, calm, final. In that moment, she reclaimed no title, demanded no apology. She didn't need to. Her record, her skill, her silence, they had already done the work. Around them, the younger soldiers stood a little straighter. They didn't just see an older woman anymore. They saw what quiet mastery looked like, and in the days ahead, they'd tell this story. At the chow hall, in the barracks, over Call's home. The details would shift, but one thing would remain. The shock of realizing they'd been standing next to a legend, and hadn't known it until she decided it was time to show them. In life, whether in the military, in the workplace, or in our neighborhoods, we are quick to judge. We read the surface and think we've seen the whole story. But experience, real, hard-earned experience, leaves subtle signs. Not everyone can read them, but those who can recognize the quiet weight of competence when it's in the room. Lena's name on that plate had been there all along. The truth hadn't changed, only the eyes looking at it. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson. Sometimes what you need most isn't a new hero. It's a new way of seeing the ones who've been there all along. The morning after the crisis, the armory felt different. Conversations were quieter, the air less charged with competition and more with focus. Mason Holt entered without his usual swagger. In his hands was not a rifle, but a clean, spiral-bound notebook and a pen. He spotted Lena Vargis at the same corner workbench where she'd worked the day before, cataloging ammunition inventory with the same calm precision. He stopped a few feet away. "Master Sergeant," he began, voice stripped of arrogance. "I was wrong. I was unprofessional. There's no excuse for it." Lena looked up, her gray eyes steady on his. She didn't fill the silence, letting him continue. "If you'd be willing, I'd be honored if you'd teach me what you know." There was no smirk now, no attempt to make light of the moment. Holt's words were plain and heavy with sincerity. Lena gave a small, economical nod. The first lesson, she said evenly, is to respect the tool. Tool, every weapon, every soldier. Assumptions are a form of rust. They corrode judgment. From that day forward, she began to train not just Holt, but the entire cadre of armorers and shooters. Her lessons weren't about chasing speed records or bragging rights. She taught them to listen to a weapon, to feel for the subtle signs of wear, to understand that precision begins in the mind before it reaches the hands. She made them strip rifles in silence so they could hear every click and scrape. She drilled into them that a weapon wasn't just steel and polymer. It was a trust, a responsibility. Word spread quickly. New recruits were told, "You'll learn the Vargis method." And it wasn't a joke. Soldiers began arriving early for maintenance drills, not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to match her standard. It wasn't long before her influence reached beyond technique. The swagger and loud talk that once defined the unit's culture began to fade. In its place grew a quiet discipline, a shared pride in doing things right rather than just doing them fast. One afternoon, Holt gathered a group of soldiers in front of the Bishop Trophy plate. They took it down from the wall for the first time in years. Together, they spent hours polishing the tarnished silver and cleaning the small brass plate engraved with L. Vargis. But they didn't hang it back where it had been. Instead, they built a single display case for it and placed it right at the entrance to the armory. Inside, the trophy shone under soft light, its engraved name catching the eye of everyone who walked in. It became part of the unit's orientation. Every new soldier was brought to the case on their first day. Holt himself would tell the story, never skipping the part where he'd misjudged her. He ended each retelling the same way. "Let this be the first and last thing you see when you come here. True worth is never loud. It's in your work, your respect, and the silence where competence lives." Through it all, Lena remained the same. She never spoke about her past missions or her record. She didn't linger near the display case or correct the stories that grew around her. She simply continued to work, a quiet force holding the unit to a higher standard. Her real legacy wasn't in the trophy or the title. It was in the steady hands of the young armorers she trained, in the calm breathing of shooters on the line, and in the culture of a unit that had learned the power of humility. Because in the end, the lesson she left them with was simple. The deepest rivers make the least noise. The most capable among us have nothing to prove with words. Their proof is in the work, in the silence that follows. What happened in that armory was more than a military anecdote. It was a mirror, reflecting how we, as people, choose to see one another, or fail to. In modern America, speed rules. We swipe, scroll, and judge in an instant. Someone's too old? Must be out of touch. Someone's quiet? Must not have much to offer. We create these labels without even realizing it, and then we miss the gold that's right in front of us. Lena Vargis stood in that room as living proof that appearances can lie, and that real value often wears a humble coat. She didn't need to advertise her worth. She simply carried it, ready for the one moment that would make it undeniable. Think about that in your own life. Maybe you've worked decades at a trade, in a business, or raising a family, and people don't see the depth of what you know. Or maybe you've looked at someone else and underestimated them because they didn't look the part. If we're honest, we've all been on both sides of that equation. And here's the thing. In today's workplace, communities, even families, the gap between generations is wider than ever. Younger voices often push for speed, change, disruption. Older voices carry patience, perspective, and craft. The healthiest teams and the healthiest communities are the ones that blend both, where wisdom guides energy and energy respects wisdom. So I'll ask you directly, have you ever seen someone's quiet skill change everything in the moment it was needed? Was it a parent fixing something no one else could? A coworker solving a crisis when the experts had failed? Or maybe, just maybe, it was you. Share that moment in the comments. Your story might be the reminder someone else needs, that their value hasn't faded, even if the world has stopped looking for it. And let's talk about something bigger. Do you think our culture does enough to honor the experience of older generations? Or have we allowed ourselves to be too distracted by speed and style to notice substance? I want to hear your thoughts, and I welcome the debate, because that's how change starts. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it touched you, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who could use this message. Remember, in a noisy world, the quietest hands may be the ones holding everything together, and you never know when you'll be standing next to a legend until the moment they decide to show you.